Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the CBI's SME webinar. Today, focused on how firms can get the right insurance placed for both uncertain and more certain times. Now, to deliver today's session, we're delighted to be doing this in partnership with Marsh Commercial, and specifically David Scott, who is Senior Vice President at Marsh, will be taking us and supporting us through today's conversation. We'll be looking at some of the common pitfalls companies fall into with regard to insurance, how to avoid these, and how to get the right insurance from you. Also, a bit of an understanding as to what's happening in the insurance industry at the moment, because as you can imagine, there's been lots of change over the past 18 months for everyone, but specifically for the insurance industry. Now, today's format, we're going to have it slightly different to normal. We've had some really good questions come in advance, which we're keen to get through and make sure we get covered off. So David and I will probably have a bit of a conversation to start with, and then what we'd like to do is open things up to questions. So as normal, please drop your questions into the chat box, and we will try to get through as many as possible. If we aren't able to get through them, then don't worry, we will give them to David and he will have some homework and he will come back to you on a one-to-one basis and get those answered. Also, I'm really pleased to share that Marsh have very kindly, they're going to be giving a complimentary insurance health check review with one of their brokers for everyone on this call. So, and we'll send you details of that. And that's really to sort of look at what insurance you've got and whether it's fit for purpose. It is non-obligation, of course, but hopefully is a useful tool for you to assess what you've got. Anyway, enough of me chatting. We want to be hearing about insurance on this soggy Thursday. And David, perhaps we can start just really with that overview of what's happening in the industry at the moment right now. We know many members are struggling with insurance and what's happening, so it will be interesting to just sort of get that overview of what is happening from your perspective.
Yeah, hi Deborah, and morning everybody, and thank you for having me. Yeah, it's been an interesting 18 months. I was thinking before we got on this call this morning about I turned the clocks back 18 months and thought what were the things that were at the top of our agenda back then, pre-COVID, and you know, a lot of our time and energy was being spent talking about how do we, as a business ourselves, but also in supporting our customers, respond to Brexit. How do we manage our way through Brexit? We were looking at the state of the insurance market. You know, we were seeing constantly inflating premiums due to an extremely hard insurance market. A lot of that being driven out of inflated claims costs. And as we were looking forward back then, you know, we were really looking at how do we and our customers respond to the kind of environmental challenges that we were facing globally. Then 15 months ago, all of a sudden, COVID hit. You know, our focus then had to become almost entirely on that. So, you're talking for our business, you know, we had to mobilise just over 2,500 colleagues who are all office-based, and suddenly, and we had, I think it took us 10 days to go from office-based to complete remote working, which was a challenge, and I'm sure one that all of your members, in one way or another, have all struggled with. And since then, really, COVID has dominated our world, whether that be how we as a business survive and operate through it, but also, you know, most importantly, how we support our customers through that. So if we look at where the industry is at right now, I mean, the reserves that are in place at the moment to respond to COVID claims are huge. The current estimates are that COVID's going to cost the insurance industry upwards of $2.5 billion in claims payments. And that's an ongoing process. People will be aware of things like the FCA test case, which I'll talk about. I think if I reflect on the last 15 months, and this is my opinion and my opinion only, but I don't think our industry as a whole has covered itself in glory. I think a lot of insurers were very slow to respond to in twofold, and that's number one, how they actually mobilize their business in order to serve their customers, and number two, how they've responded to the needs of customers through, you know, claims due to the issues suffered as a result of COVID. we were extremely active in supporting the FCA test case. We submitted a lot of policy wordings to the test case. My view is that the insurance broker, our role is to support our customers as best we can. So we very much sit on the side of the customer rather than the side of the insurance company. And we've been very active in supporting that FCA test case. My view is I think the FCA have come to the right conclusion, that it's the right outcome. But I think the really important thing to understand is that I look in the media at the moment and there's so much misinformation out there about what the outcome of that test case actually means, because the reality is the vast majority of business interruption insurance policies still won't respond to COVID because of the requirement for physical damage. I think the one piece of advice, coming back to the question you asked, Deborah, the one piece of advice I can give is speak to your broker, speak to your insurance broker, and find out, and ask ask whether you're covered or not, whether your policy's in force and whether it will respond. By now, your insurance broker should have an answer to that question. Okay.
Great, thank you. And I think that's, thank you for being really honest, because I think it's it's not been the greatest year for both insurance and the customers as well. And I think I remember this time last year when cash was, and it still is actually, the amount of debt is incredibly high. Cash is king, and especially for our SME community, that flow of finance is incredibly important. So perhaps just sort of looking at sort of more sort of now and into the future, David, I mean, when you're approaching buying insurance, what are the things that you should be thinking about to get the best deal? And I suppose, are there any red flags that you might have when you're talking to a broker, that if they're talking about, I don't know, I think if they start off with cost as opposed to what you need, that would be a red flag for me. So what's the best way to approach buying and getting the best deal for insurance, and any red flags you think people should be looking for?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point you made there. So my first piece of advice is any broker who starts the conversation with, "I can save you money on your insurance," personally, I would walk away. And I know that goes again. We as an industry have been a cause towards that kind of approach to things. But of course, the intention is always to get the best possible deal. But to start a conversation with, "I can save you money," without understanding what it is you actually need or want, for me is the wrong way round. And I think, so when I talk to SMEs or businesses of any size, the first thing I always say is consider your kind of risk protection. Set yourself as part of your budgeting process. Look at how much of your budget you're going to set aside for risk management and risk mitigation, including your insurance. Typically, I would say that an SME should be looking at somewhere between 1% and 2% of their turnover as a budget, and that's not just for the insurance; it's for insurance and other risk mitigation factors. I think one of the things that we've seen as a result of the kind of the previously hardening market, but also the reserves that are happening as a result of COVID, is that insurers more than ever, in 23 years in this industry, more than I've ever known, insurers will just decline risks. They will just decline insurance if it doesn't fit their absolute kind of core appetite. And it's been quoted to me that it's easier for insurers or for underwriters to say no than it is to say yes at the moment. And I'm not talking about claims, I'm talking about actually offering a quote. And so the value, I think, of the broker there is to really understand the business and work out the best way to present the risk to insurers. And so actually finding a broker whose primary concern is to try and understand your business and then work out what it is you need to do to protect the risks that exist in that business, and then present that to insurers, will almost always get you the best outcome. I think the other thing is that historically, look, we all have our own way of negotiating. Okay, and I think the way that you would negotiate the best policy in the past is probably different to now. That playing for the last minute and then trying to head off a couple of insurers against each other, which is what we as brokers have done for years. We would hold insurers against each other, and then right at the last minute we would negotiate on behalf of our clients to get the best possible quote. It just doesn't work now. Insurers are more likely to look at that and walk away. So for us, it's about, we try and get in early, we get as much facts as we can for the insurers, we build a really robust picture of what that business looks like, and we sell the business to the insurer in order to get the right rate. So yeah, I think things have definitely changed, but I think for me it is around work with a broker who tries to understand your business rather than starts with trying to save you money. That will almost inevitably end up saving you money in the long run. And really being forthcoming with information and getting ahead of the game, because the other thing you see a lot is that if insurers see insurance presentations or requests for quotes right at the last minute, they're more than likely just to decline the quote. But given time to look at it, understand it, and work on it, they're more likely to look to work with you on it.
Yeah, my grandpa was actually an insurance salesman. He used to go door to door with my mum when she was very little, going collecting. And his was always, looking at how to reduce cost for those, and actually was an incredibly good salesman as a result, because he worked from exactly that principle, is getting the best for the customer, so you get that trust. In terms of, I suppose, COVID, and hopefully, and David, we were just talking, hopefully, the world is starting to come back, and we're starting to see things ease up. But I think COVID has had a major impact on the insurance industry. And can you perhaps share some of the areas that perhaps have gone wrong, common mistakes, and how to avoid them? And I mean both from perhaps some of the learning from the insurance industry, but also perhaps from some of the businesses. We don't know what the future holds. I think we have to accept that we might always have uncertain times. We don't know what those are. What's the next thing on the horizon? So perhaps share some of the things that have gone wrong, common mistakes, and how you can avoid those in future.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think thinking about some of the most common things that we've seen over the last 12 months or so, one of the biggest changes we've seen is that COVID has forced a lot, well, I say a lot, almost all insurers to have changed their policy wordings, to tighten the wordings up in order to exclude kind of future exposures to similar type things. Now, at points during the last 12 months, and it's not something which I can go into any real detail on, but there are certain insurers and certain policies that we as a broker refuse to recommend to our clients because of those wordings. So my advice on that, so if I give you an example, if you run a business that has a premises and that premises has been closed down due to COVID, if that premises was broken into during your typical working day, but it happened at a time when the office was, or the premises was closed due to COVID, would that break-in have been considered to be either directly or indirectly as a result of COVID? And we've seen that exact situation occur, where the wordings that have been put into some policies were so broad, the exclusions were so broad, that actually it almost wrote off the majority of the wording within the insurance itself. And so I guess the advice that I would give on that is to, particularly if you've got a renewal either you've just been through or you're just coming up to, is to really challenge your broker to explain to you what changes have been made into the wording around COVID and how that might impact certain scenarios within the business. Because and I don't think it's the intent of insurers to write out a theft or a flood or a fire that's not related. But if you took the pure legal definition of the wording, it could well do. And my view is that a broker that's doing the right job for its clients will have explored that wording, taken a legal view on it, and will be presenting all of the risks that exist to their clients. If that conversation isn't happening, then my advice would be ask and challenge and insist that you get a plain English explanation. The only other thing for me, I think, is that a lot of businesses have changed their operating model over the last 12 to 18 months. So we might be doing more online. Hospitality premises might be doing takeaways or deliveries. I think it's make sure the necessary changes have been made to the policy so that it reflects whatever's changed to the business, because it's really important that the description of the business matches what the business is doing.
That's a really good point, actually, as you say, because people have had to be very agile, haven't they, and adapt to the circumstances to keep their business afloat. I mean, just in relation to that, I mean, that's a very good point in terms of when your business changes, that actually you do need that, revisiting your insurance and documents to make sure it's adequately covering and is a very good point. But just perhaps, I suppose, how frequently should you review your insurance in, I don't want to say normal times, in more, you know what I mean, in more normal times, more on a regular basis? How frequently should that happen?
So I think there's probably two answers to that question. I think in terms of shopping around, so looking at price, we tend to advise try not to move from insurer to insurer every year, and we will always try and keep with the same insurer for a few years, because the reason is that when you present a new quote to an insurer, if they can see that it's been with the last insurer for 3 years, they make the assumption that it's probably going to be with them for the next 3 years at least. And therefore that spreads the risk. So that spreads the risk of a large loss or a large claim over 3 years worth of premiums rather than one. So if they look at your insurance history and see that you've moved from insurer to insurer to insurer year on year, chasing the best price or whatever that might be, they're going to look at that and assume that you're probably going to do the same again next year. So when you're looking at pure price comparison, we tend to operate on a 3-year cycle, unless of course you've seen huge hikes in premiums. Then of course then that changes the game. When we're talking about understanding that the policy is still fit for purpose, our belief is that should be done every year. So every year, as a minimum, there should be a what's changed, what's the same, have we got all the limits right, is the cover still fit for purpose? My advice would also be, if you've made if there are any events in your business, so that's a massive change in turnover, change in employee numbers, or just a change to the way that you operate or new contracts, speak to your broker and make sure the policy is still fit for purpose.
And actually, we just had one question come into the box in terms of sort of changes of key personnel within the company. So within that board level, is that a time when you should be having a conversation? So, your CEO changes, your chair changes. Is that an important factor?
Yeah, I think it is absolutely for two reasons. Number one, I think it's important that your kind of senior leadership within the business know who's handling the risk for the business. I think that's just an important part of working together in partnership. I think number two is that inevitably when you change leadership in a business, they may have a different vision for the business, or at least a version of the existing vision. And so helping an insurance broker to understand what the forward-looking vision is, we talk a lot about, rather than looking at what your business is doing today, is saying, well, what do we think is going to happen over the next 3 years? Let's make sure that whatever you've got in place now sort of sees you through that. It becomes future-proof. So for me, though, it's vital to do that, and I think those are the two main reasons. Keep the relationship strong, keep the partnership strong. Number two, make sure that we understand your vision for your business.
Okay, thank you. And do keep popping your questions into the chat box. We will get to them and hopefully get through those. I mean, so I suppose the question is, how do you hunt for the right product at the right price? What are the sort of, if I'm looking for my SME insurance, what should be on my checklist of questions and things that I should be making sure are covered off?
Okay. So I think, first of all, it's about picking a broker or two to work with, and that's people who pick brokers who get to know your business over and above anything else. That anyone who walks in and says, "Have you got last year's renewal documents?" Is only interested in your renewal date and your price, not in your business. is my view. And if I give an example of why it's important to pick the right one or two brokers to support you, is that a case that came across my desk not so long ago was we were approached by a client. We were actually recommended to speak to somebody who had been really struggling to get the right policy. By the time they came to us, they'd already spoken to 4 other brokers who had done their thing and been out and spoken to all of the different insurer markets. And if I'm honest, had done a pretty poor job of presenting that business to the insurance market. What had happened is that the result of that is most insurers had declined the risk. And one of the challenges we've got in our market is once an insurer has declined a risk to a particular broker, then that becomes a flat decline to anyone else who comes in to talk about the same insurance policy or the same company. So my view is before you instruct a broker to go to market for you, pick somebody who you believe knows your business. I think ask the broker what's your marketing strategy going to be? How are you going to present my business to the insurance markets? One of the things that's changed a lot is we used to, our business historically has always run on I come to your place of work, I walk around your premises, we sit in your boardroom or sit in your office, have a cup of coffee, and then I go away and do my thing. Of course, we haven't really done that over the last 18 months. So I think there is value in visiting site, but I would place a lot more value in understanding the process that broker is going to go through. Can they convince you that they care enough to do a good job? I think is for me would always be the most important thing. Think about risk mitigation. So outside of insurance, so look at the things that you can do to manage risk, because insurers, if insurers and brokers see a business where risk has been managed, the chances are you're going to get a much better deal out of the market. And then the last one, which is just a kind of aside that I was thinking about earlier, is that if you're part of an industry body, it's definitely worth seeing whether that industry body has partnered with somebody. We work with a number, and there's lots of others that we don't work with, but still have really good offerings in place, where they've got specifically designed schemes that are set up for a particular industry. What you tend to find is those are the wordings are tailored for the industry, number one, and number two, they tend to escape a lot of the big premium fluctuations because you've got a lot of volume in one space. The premiums are much more resistant to kind of market conditions. So if you're part of an industry body, it's definitely worth having a look to see whether they've negotiated any particular schemes, because that might be a good way forward.
Yeah, that's probably particularly good around trade bodies, specific trade bodies, because people are often members of organisations like CBI, but also then they're a very specific trade body as well, and that's probably where that sort of offer is. I know the FSB do some good packages as well. Just going back to that question of risk, and you mentioned, how do you demonstrating that risk is well managed. Can you sort of quantify that for a little bit for us, David? Sort of what are the things that you would be looking for from an SME in terms of being able to proactively demonstrate that you're proactively managing your risk?
Yeah, so it's a huge subject, and it very much depends on what their business activities are. But anything as rudimentary as getting security around a premises, through to how you train your employees and your colleagues around health and safety. If you've got a vehicle fleet, for example, how you invest in driver training, how you invest in telematics, how you manage things like stock levels. It's really what sort of cybersecurity you might have in place on your IT infrastructure if you're very much a digital company. There's a huge range of things, and it's very specific. There's a lot of specifics to industry, and I think that's where, again, engaging with a broker, they can talk to you about the things that are going to make the biggest difference, so that it's not kind of money that doesn't pay you back, so that you get the best bang for your buck, for want of a better phrase.
And is that something you could expect from a broker? Is that a question that you could ask, which is, actually help me think about some of my risk? I know that's an area of your expertise, but is that something that's reasonable to ask from a broker, to sort of think about, how you get their confidence up and potentially your premiums down?
I think it's an absolute must. I mean, so for
Yeah.
me, we're in the risk business, and so if we can't talk about risk beyond insurance premiums, we're not doing our jobs. And that doesn't have to be a broker who comes out and spends 4 hours walking around your factory or anything. Even if I look at some of the people that we've got who service clients purely over the phone, they will still be able to have proper risk-based conversations around, have you thought about this? What are you doing about that? And really talking through it. So I think brokers should be able to, and should be pushing the conversation about risk rather than waiting for it to come to them.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful, because that's one of the questions that popped up, along with legal requirements for SMEs. Which, what
Yes.
are things that what are things that I must do? What's the sort
Well,
of
you must
minimum
have your
that?
employer's liability.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you must have your employer's liability in place. If you're supplying to or dealing with the public, then public liability is a really important cover that you need to have in play. If you're a member of a trade body, some trade bodies will insist that you have certain levels of cover as part of your membership, so it's worth checking. So if you've got regulatory requirements, obviously if you're operating vehicles, you need your legal requirements around motor risk. Beyond that, then you start to look at whether you need things like your professional indemnity. So if you're giving professional advice, is that something you need to insure against? Cyber risks, it's an ever increasing risk at the moment, and it's widely talked about, probably not taken as seriously as it should be, until somebody falls victim to it. I won't go into the details of who, but I had a client I was out with, it was probably 18 months, 2 years ago now. And I spoke to them about the cyber risk to their business, because they'd made a big change to the way they were selling goods. And we talked about it. We looked at kind of the cost of cyber insurance, and at the time they decided not to go with it, because they were reassured by their IT provider that they had a really robust system. Unfortunately, 2 weeks after that conversation, a Friday afternoon email came in from the MD to the FD asking them to pay an invoice for 10,000, because it was 3:30 on a Friday afternoon, and it was the email was worded exactly as it would be from the MD, because that's how it's done. They transferred the money and lost out on quite a significant amount of money, which would have otherwise been covered. So yeah, that's it's important to consider those types of risks. And then it's really, if you're limited company, protecting the directors of that business with something like a directors and officers policy, again, is a really valuable area to look at. Then beyond that, it's just tailoring a product to suit the needs of your business, whether you've got products, so you need to cover your liability to those.
Yeah, and I think what you've just covered there is some of the really key things that businesses do need to think about. It's interesting in this profession at CBI, some of the stories you do hear, and perhaps some of the unexpected. There's one company who I mean it's well it's hideous. They in terms of their IT, they'd done all the cyber security, but and they got a company come in to sort of assess risk, and they employed it, and they didn't really know what was going to happen. And one day somebody turned up with lanyards on and came and basically said that they needed to take away some of the IT equipment, of which they found out their team were very helpful. They loaded a load of the IT equipment onto the truck and it drove off. Fortunately, it was the risk assessment company, and they were able to put in certain practices. Sorry, I ran, but it was yeah, it was a bit of a shock for that company. Sorry, Terry, going back to some of the questions that we've got coming in. One is around, and well, actually, I'll hold off on that question, because I think there's a question that's quite interesting around tourism in particular. We know tourism has, it struggled massively, has been perhaps the most, one of the most hit sectors as a result of COVID, and really struggling to get insurance. Have you got any advice for that sector, and what perhaps they need to get in place for their broker?
Yeah. So from a tourism perspective, there are, we operate some around some tourism businesses, and there are definitely insurers out there who are insuring tourism businesses right now, and are are keen in that space. are there any insurance companies out there offering a policy that will cover a tourism business against a future COVID? Honestly, not right now. There aren't. No. So to get that sort of pandemic cover in for that tourism industry is just something that's not commercially available at a price that's commercially sensible. But there absolutely are insurers out there who are willing to support tourism businesses to get back up and running in terms of getting all the other covers that they need. The things to consider is to look at what you think projecting future turnovers. So are we likely to see a spike in UK tourism in staycations this year? I think we probably are, and we're certainly seeing through a lot of the UK kind of holiday park industries that we work with that they are absolutely insuring up, getting ready for that for that to happen, and I really hope it does. I'm hoping I can get away on a couple of staycations myself this year, but I think there are a number of brokers out there that specialise in the tourism sector. Speak to them, ask them what's going on, what you can do, and then just work with them to help put together a risk presentation. Look at what's happened over the last 12 to 18 months. Have there been any things that you've done around? Because what we're seeing is a lot of the people we deal with have used that downtime to make improvements within the means that they've got available. So make sure you communicate that, because if you've made improvements to your premises, make sure you communicate that to your insurance brokers. But there's definitely insurance out there right now for people in that industry.
Great, that's good to hear. Actually, we've had some conversations this week with our international team. We've had some updates for members from our Washington office and our Brussels office, and interestingly, the members on those calls haven't been talking about trade deals, which they often do. They've been actually saying, I want to get to the US because I want to get back into business. I want to be talking about I want to be looking at growing my business. I want to be over. In terms of that sort of international business travel, is there anything in particular you would be recommending to companies to make sure they're thinking about, or additional cover that they might be requiring as they're sort of, genuinely starting to think about jumping on planes? And
yeah, I think again is whether policies will meet delays and abandonment due to COVID is worth looking at. But most, again, it's the same as previously. Most insurance policies are writing that out. But other than that, I think it's two things. From an insurance point of view, get the right policy. Speak to your broker; they'll be able to get you a corporate travel policy, which are inexpensive in comparison. Make sure it is a corporate travel policy and not a one that you buy on Money Supermarket for kind of domestic travel or recreational travel, which we see a lot of. We see a lot of that happening, and then it's just about making sure that you're keeping a close eye on what's happening from each country to country. Around travel.
Again, something that came up actually yesterday on a call that I was on was talking around natural disasters and and sort of impacts of nature and net zero and climate change. So there's a couple of companies have been talking around issues getting hold of semiconductors as a result of some of the droughts that are going on in Asia. And I think that sometimes, especially with some of our manufacturers, not necessarily thinking always as globally, and the impact of because sometimes your supply chain, you don't realize how far away your supply chain is, and it's second and third. Is there any advice you would give to companies when they're thinking, and this is a much more longer term risk, but how do you sort of protect yourself against I suppose that the changes globally that it's quite hard to predict, like the Texas big freeze or droughts in Asia impacting on semiconductors. Is there anything you'd be suggesting to companies to be thinking about? I mean, that's a risk area, but from an insurance perspective, or is that perhaps a step too far?
No, I mean, so one of the things that we'll look at, particularly if we're working with a business that imports or exports, one of the things we will look at is we will map their end-to-end supply chain. And what you do is you map the end-to-end supply chain, and you make sure that throughout that chain, either you've got clear handover of cover to cover from as it passes from one place to the next, or you put one policy in that covers the entire journey through the supply chain. And again, that's just about understanding. And this is one of the things that again a broker should be able to help with, is to understand the contractual liability along the supply chain. So at what point, who is responsible, who is liable for the goods in transit as they move through the supply chain, or the supply of or failure of a part of the supply chain, and then helping to protect against each part of that, or at least ensure that the protection is in place through contracts. So we should be looking, working with businesses around, is their contractual liability in the right place, and therefore all the right safeguards there to support it.
Thank you. Would that also apply to, and again, this came up this week, and I might say it incorrectly, sorry, this is where my dyslexia comes out sometimes, demurrage. So some companies being hit by demurrage, where it's, the penalty that that if for unloading stock from containers, and the cost for the shipping companies, because they get a penalty fine, and that's starting to come through to some of the members, that they're being hit with those costs. Is that something that could be covered by insurance, or again, is that just, it's one of those sucker punches that's that's hitting us? Sorry, that's quite
No,
a
you
detailed,
can absolutely
specific question, David.
no, you can absolutely protect against that. We had quite an interesting one. It's probably a couple of years ago now, where one of our clients suffered exactly that, where they had a shipment of cheese going to I'm trying to remember, I can't remember where it was going to, but that had to be removed from the container because they noticed a leak in the coolant system. And the insurers responded to that. So what the insurers did was they actually managed to find an alternative customer that was prepared to accept the cheese, despite that fact. So it went to a different country, so sold it, and then covered the balance of the stock and the cost of removal and haulage. So it is something that happens, and it is something that can be protected against.
Right, great. Okay, thank you. And I've got another very specific question. Hi, Matt, from Matt. I haven't seen you in ages. I hope you're well. We've had a machine dropped by a third party. Sod's law, this happened the year after we moved brokers after 37 years. Bad broker, losing your business after 37 years. It's proving very hard to get anyone to any support on this, and it's worth around 100k, including legal bills now. Any advice? And if you can't answer that because there's not enough detail in there, what we might do is hook you up with Matt separately, David. If there's any initial reaction.
We'd probably have to look at the detail, but ultimately in any situation like that, there's two issues that we have to look at. Number one, who's liable, and number two, do they have the right protection in place for that liability? So the person who's dropped that, ultimately, if they're contracted to work on your premises, then that contract should imply some sort of form of liability. And it's just understanding where the liability sits, and then understanding what protections there are in place. But absolutely, your broker should be able to help you to do that. If you need any support, we'd be more than happy to have a chat.
Great, thank you. And Matt, I think you might be on a call that I'm on later on. I'll be sitting quietly in the background eavesdropping, so hopefully I'll hear you shortly. Right, I think we're starting to come. We've only got a couple of more minutes left. So just in terms of that health check, so it's going to go into the chat now, but we'll also send it out to everyone, so you've got it coming up in an email with a link to this, link to the session. But in terms of that health check, David, can you just give us a bit of an overview of what it looks like, what people should expect, and how best to use it?
Yeah, absolutely. The process, generally speaking, would be: tell us about your business. We will put together what we believe a business like yours should have in place. We could benchmark that against, so we wouldn't go out to insurers, we wouldn't present the insurance. We do what we would call a silent review. So we'd look at the covers that are in place, and we would advise you what gaps there are in there and what you might want to consider. Now, if you wanted us to then look at that, we'd be happy to do so. If you wanted to take our work, give it back to your existing broker and let them do it, that's also fine. So it's really just do you have the right covers in place for your business right now, and what should you be thinking about perhaps adding on or taking off as much as adding on?
Great, thank you. Right, well, those coming, so please do use that resource because, as I said, it's complimentary. And I have to say, thank you, David. Who knew insurance could be so interesting? I know,
Insurance isn't, it's the subject.
my grandpa did insurance. So yes. But thank you so much. It was very plain English as well, and some great tips. I think that 1 to 2% in particular it gives people those whereabouts should I be pitching things. So thank you so much, and thank you very much to Marsh for supporting this, and thank you everyone for joining us and signing in. I hope summer arrives eventually. Can we have some insurance against the can we get
I
promised a
wish.
summer? Mind you, can go inside now, so hopefully it's not too bad. Right, anyway, thank you very much, David. Thanks to everyone, and look forward to seeing you next month. So take care.
Thanks for having me.